Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Dallin Malm, and this is the Momentum Theory Podcast. This show features conversations with athletes, artists, and entrepreneurs who are committed to mastering their craft, not for the sake of mastery itself, but to better magnify their talents and serve those around them. My guest today is a breakout success in the world of journalism. Having won multiple Emmy Awards extremely early on in her career, she seemingly sprinted from college straight into live TV. Her trajectory earned her a shot at what you would call a career maker, a shot at working with the national news outlets. However, in 2020, at the height of her success, she felt an unmistakable and undeniable pull to intentionally change her career to align better with her faith, family, and to jump into work that would foster a stronger local impact. She's worn many hats as a professional: reporter, researcher, editor/producer, seminary and institute teacher, and now a university assistant professor. In our conversation, we dig into rejecting a, quote, permanent calling, and we get into her story of choosing local impact over national notoriety, how confusion can be a catalyst for growth, and her frameworks on how to approach pressure, earning trust, and even interviewing people you dislike. We also cover finding truth at the source, handling dark stories, and navigating the seasons of life. Please enjoy my conversation with Erin Cox.
Great moments are born from great opportunity.
You ask, what is our aim? Victory. Victory, however long and hard the road may be.
This will be remembered forever as the greatest day in the history of the Tour de France. You believe in miracles? Yes!
You and I had spoken a few years back, and you talked about how you reject the idea of a permanent calling. And you had told me that directions in life aren't static. They can pause or they can even reverse at times. Can you speak more to that?
Yeah, great question. I feel like in my lifetime and in my career, I've had the opportunity to live very different experiences and wear many different hats, right? Wearing the news reporter hat, wearing the student rookie hat, wearing the seminary teacher hat, wearing the institute teacher hat, now wearing the professor hat. And I live my life in a way that allows me to be open to wearing different hats and accepting different opportunities in my life. And I don't believe in pigeonholing yourself into one spot, because you never know the next opportunity that God could take you to. And so that has always been kind of my life motto, is to say yes and to take every opportunity, even if it really intimidates me or scares me. When I was young, I thought I was going to be a professional pianist for the rest of my life. That was my life goal. And it was at 15 years old that I realized I was a little bit more mediocre at playing the piano than I wanted to be. And my world as I knew it ended. And I didn't know what the next thing would be. I didn't feel like I was particularly talented or gifted in any way. I just felt very average and mediocre. That moment of humility allowed me to open myself up to letting God tell me I could be someone different and do something different than I thought. So yes, I believe that our life calling very much coincides with my faith, which is I go where God tells me to go. And if he tells me to make a difference in the news media, then I go. But if he tells me it's time to be in the classroom, I go. And if he tells me it's time to be at home, I go. And I believe that he makes the best of a life I never thought I could have.
You had described it as like not just pivot points. That's what you commonly hear people refer to as I pivoted in my life to this unexpected thing. But you use the word reverse. You don't hear that very often. And you had told me that, look, I was a rising star in my career. I had multiple Emmy Awards, and I was having conversations with some very big players on a huge scale. And I felt that I needed to cut this back to part-time and focus on something else.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about that and what was going on in that situation?
Right. So this was in 2020. For me, I got into the news media and was really excited. I loved doing it. I was very successful early on in my career. A lot of people back in the day, it took 10 years to get to where I was getting right out of college. And so I was
You were hired
thrilled.
right away.
Yes. 2 weeks after graduation. The last 6 months of my college, I spent 2 days out of the week going down to Salt Lake and reporting live on TV. And that was, back then, that was really kind of a novelty thing. I had known, I think, one other reporter who did an internship with Channel 2 and then was hired after college.
Yeah.
But for me, it was just so cool. I had imagined my career being 10 years later, I'll come back to Salt Lake and be able to work here, and that I was going to move elsewhere. And that just didn't happen. I immediately got the dream that I wanted. And so because of that, I started asking, well, okay, now where do I go? And the obvious answer for me at the time was reach higher. And so I'm thinking I'm going to go big and do national news.
Like
and
a Fox News thing.
Like Fox News, CNN, national news, right? And I went to New York City, and I met with a national news outlet out there and started having those conversations in 2019 and was gearing up for that. I was working on my resume, working on the stories that I pitched, all of that to get to national news. And It was in the middle of 2020 that we had this small thing called a global pandemic that really changed the news industry, but it changed everyone, right? And I remember having a phone conversation with that national news network, and they said, hey, we're having a hiring freeze during this because we're not sure where this is going to go. But we're going to revisit our conversation with you in December. I don't know if they would have ever hired me. I'd like to believe they would have. But I remember after that phone call, just this drop in my stomach and asking myself, is that really going to make you happy? And the surprise I felt when I realized, no, this thing that I am chasing will not make me happy. And then I had to ask, so what do I value? What does bring me happiness? And for me, that answer was being close to family. It was being close to my faith and my religion. It was serving my community. And it was doing local news that I could see the impact on my community. If I cover something about refugees needing backpacks, which I've done this, I have watched my community donate thousands of backpacks within hours of our news story, making an actual difference in my community and seeing that real time. And I realize that's why I do what I do, is I love seeing that change people's lives. And it wasn't about the glamour that sometimes people think come with being on TV, or it wasn't about chasing the next big shiny thing. It was about, what do I value? And does it align with my values? And if it does, then it brings me joy.
What was it about reporting at the highest level that would not have given you that opportunity?
I think for me, it was the fact that I would have been traveling all the time.
Okay.
Which some people find really fulfilling.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I really value a place to come home to, a community to connect with. My joy comes from the relationships I have with people, not necessarily the things that I accomplish. Though that does bring me a level of joy. For me, the most fulfilling things was being able to have that community to come home and talk around the dinner table, or see a neighbor and say, hey, thanks for covering that, or something like that. Whereas on the national scale, again, greater impact, huge impact, but it wasn't the impact that would also bless my life.
I mean, this is the same plot as one of my favorite movies of all time, It's a Wonderful Life.
That's also my favorite movie.
We watch it every Christmas Eve as a
yes.
family. And I love that. It's so Jimmy Stewart plays that character where that is his thing.
Yes.
Different than your story where he is compelled to stay home. He doesn't have a choice.
Right.
But he has these big dreams. And at the end of the movie, it turns out that if he hadn't been there, everybody's lives in that whole town would have been worse off.
Right.
If he had never been there. Do you feel like if you would have taken a job at a national outlet, Fox News or CNN or something like that, from not taking that kind of a job, do you avoid any other things that you don't want in your life? Basically, the things that come with the job.
Yes. In short, every choice you make is a yes to something and a no to another thing,
Yeah.
right? And for me, the yeses that I was choosing outweighed the no's, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it just didn't appeal to me. Some people, that appeals to them and they thrive in that industry and they do well. I'll tell you this. I had a conversation with President Russell M. Nelson 5 or 6 years ago. What an incredible man, right? Number one, if you don't know him as a religious leader, which he was of a worldwide faith, he was the guy that invented and helped pilot open heart surgery for the world. So a literal life-changing person on this planet. And he said over his years in the medical field, he had more than 90 awards. I'm sure his attic was just stacked with trophies. He had so many awards, and he said more important than what I was doing was who I was becoming as I did that. And that has always stayed with me because everyone can argue we needed a Russell M. Nelson in this world for the contributions he made. But for him, what he valued was who he was becoming as he made those contributions. And I realized that though my contributions are definitely not as large scale as Russell M. Nelson or anyone else, but I need my contributions to matter about who I am more than what I'm doing, if that makes sense.
Is that something that you learned from your dad?
That's something I learned from both my parents. I have really incredible parents. They value the small and simple things. And we lived a very traditional life of you're fighting to pay the bills and you're working your way up the American dream and you're having 5 kids on the way and all of this stuff. And they took the time to instill education in us, wanting us to be educated. My dad always said, Erin, I don't care what you do with your life as long as you're able to pay your bills, be self-sufficient, and do what you love. And that just enabled me to dream. And so, yes, a lot of this comes from parents who gave me a good foundation and taught me the small and simple things of life and to cherish those things. And then the dreams, those are just cherries on top. It's just a delight to have big dreams and see them come through. But it's really the everyday things of life that really matter.
Tell me about your philosophy surrounding confusion. You've told me that it's evidence of growth. It's a necessary process and more of a sign of maturity and not necessarily failure. Can you speak more to that?
Confusion and misinformation is kind of my specialty, right? My job is all about making sure things are clear, things are understandable, knowledge is accessible. I used to believe that the best writers and orators were the ones who spoke so flowery and their language was just so pious and beautiful. And the older I get, the more I realize, no, that is not beauty. To me, beautiful language is accessibility. Powerful wording is being able to explain something so that everyone in the room can understand and not just one educated person. And so confusion and misinformation is huge right now. Interestingly enough, because we have more access to information than we've ever had before.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's so much power in confusion and misinformation because it compels you to do something. That's why knowledge is power. It compels you to do or know something or become something, right? And so what does misinformation and confusion do? Well, they point me in a direction. And I have a choice. I have a choice to believe it and remain in darkness, or I have a choice to find something that either refutes it or clarifies it and to receive greater light. And so confusion and misinformation can be a catalyst, and it can be a moment where you learn greater truth. And if you had just had an easy life with no confusion, no challenges, no darkness, you would never understand how great it feels to sit in the light and to have truth and to have knowledge and to have attributes. So
the only way you learn that is through your own heart experience.
Right.
Maybe you can learn it from the experience of others, which is preferable, but
yes.
I think a lot of it's unavoidable.
Yes.
Like you could probably draw from your own experience as a young student in journalism, like how many embarrassing gaffes on camera, or maybe even people that were offended along the way. Like how else are you supposed to do it? Like I think for the companies that have done the best in the last 20 years, it has been those who live by Facebook's motto of move fast and break things. They move tremendously fast.
Yes.
There's a tremendous cost associated with that, but if people are in the fight still,
Yes.
there's an amazing book I read this year from Eric Berger. It's called Liftoff. It's about the early days of SpaceX. Would 10 out of 10 recommend that to anybody. And Elon Musk is fresh out of PayPal. He was kicked off the board, but
Yes.
he made a massive payout. And he put some of the money in Tesla, he put some in Solar City, and then he put some in SpaceX. And in order to get things started, he said, look, we're going to make the first low-cost trip to Mars, and we're going to colonize Mars. That was from the very beginning. And they talk about the cost, the amount of money that he spent and the amount of iterations. And the Apollo programs, what had taken them a 25-year span and was left relatively unfinished, took SpaceX about 7 years to do.
Yeah.
And they had launched 4 rockets. One of them sustained orbit, one of them reached the outer atmosphere and then exploded. And it's that amazing story. But it was built on the backs of these amazing people who were driven by purpose.
Yes.
There was one guy referenced specifically who was recruited over. He worked at Lockheed Martin. His whole job, the entirety of his professional existence, was to find a single bolt. That was his entire job, to find it, make sure the specs were up to whatever they needed, to make sure the pricing was correct, to negotiate everything down, and then to distribute it wherever it needed to go. And he had a Steve Jobs moment where he was approached and said, do you want to keep doing this, or do you want to make a dent in the universe? And it was purpose driven, but you've seen the pictures of them, of literally swimming out to the open ocean and dragging back the shards and putting them in piles, trying to figure out what went wrong and to rebuild that rocket. And they paid a price that nobody in the history of the world had been willing to pay. And now they're doing things that nobody can even do. Nobody's even close right now.
Absolutely. Well, and again, this kind of goes back to something you and I talked before we recorded about, my students today and what they struggle with. And one of the things I notice about the world today is we struggle with failure, right? We live in such a perfectly procured world. Social media is perfect. Everything you see, I'm sure SpaceX didn't publish all of their failures right away, right? Oftentimes we hear about the failures after the fact, and we forget that even though you're purpose-driven doesn't mean you're not going to fail. And those failures are just as important to the successes, if not even more so. That lesson came when I lived in Hong Kong, China. So I served a mission for my church there. Year and a half, learned Cantonese, the second hardest language in the world on some scales. And that was not in my to-do list for life. Like, never thought, truth be told, I didn't think I was smart enough to ever learn a Chinese language, because French was a nightmare for me in high school. And Spanish, don't even get me started. But I loved it. And when you learn a new language, you learn this, is you have to be willing to look stupid in order to learn that language. You have to be willing to open your mouth and sound like an absolute idiot in the middle of Hong Kong, China, with 7 billion other people in order to one day be able to speak like a native. And it's the same principle. You have to be willing to fail in order to receive your ultimate purpose that you're wanting. And it's what you do with those failures. We hear this all the time. This is nothing new, but it's what you do with those failures that really determines not only who you are, but what kind of career you have.
Was that the difference maker in your career? Were you willing to fail more than other people, and that's what helped you to rise fast early in your career?
I think I rose fast because people took a chance on me. I was the rookie reporter, and I had people who believed in me. And that, I cannot understand that, how much that meant to me. When someone believes in you, you'll give them the world and you'll work your guts out. That is something that I learned again in that time that I lived in Hong Kong. I went out there thinking that I was stupid. School was hard for me growing up. I was not a straight A student. I really struggled. I was an A and B student, but I had to really work hard to get those A's and B's.
People, for somebody who, you and I grew up across the street from each other, I would have never have known that.
Yeah.
You were always very smart, in my eyes at least.
No. And here's the thing, Dallin. You know my siblings. I have brothers who are geniuses. Every school wanted them, and I knew early on that if I wanted a college degree, I better get a job now. I got my first job as a 16-year-old, worked at the Arby's, because I wanted to go to college. And I knew that I wasn't smart enough to get a scholarship. And I knew that I wasn't smart enough to make those cuts. And so I went out to China with this framework of mind of I'm not very smart, I'm not very bright, I'm going to struggle. I even had a neighbor pulled me aside and said, you're not as smart as your brothers, you're probably going to really struggle, so buckle up. And it was just like, it wasn't just me who thought I was dumb. Other people thought I was dumb, right? And I go out there to China and I'm learning this language. And when you serve a mission, you do it with prayer and with communication with God. And I spent a lot of time on my knees, but I just really believed that if I was going to learn that language, it would be a miracle. And I just didn't think twice about it. And so I just didn't care. And there was about halfway through where I remember waking up one day and having this thought that changed my life. And it was this. It was the voice that just said, I don't think you're stupid. In fact, I think you're really smart. And I think you can do this. And believing that God saw me as someone that I wasn't, I could do the world with that. I could do the impossible with someone like that believing in me. And I did. I learned Cantonese and now I know Mandarin. I speak 2 Chinese languages, and that's nothing I ever thought I would be capable of doing. But I knew I could do it if God believed in me. And it's the same with my career. People gave me opportunities and let me know that they believed in me. And because of that, I gave them the world. I said, I can work my guts out for you. I can do this. I can do anything. And having that trust changed me, and it changed who I was. And so more important than having opportunities is having people behind those opportunities who believe you can accomplish it. And I mean, there were plenty of times where people said, you cannot do this. And I said, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyways. And again, it goes back to that belief that I know that God believes in me. I believe in him, but I know he also believes in me as a person and invests in me. And that trust is a catalyst for me. And it allows me to succeed in ways that perhaps others could if they had that same confidence in God or whoever they believe in, right? And so that's where it stems from. Is yes, I was given great opportunities, but I had great people lifting me up and believing in me. And when you have that, it allows you to do the impossible.
So tell me a little bit about what it's like to study journalism in college. What kind of things do you have to be prepared to do? And what does success look like? Is it a 4-year program?
Yes.
What does success look like in those 4 years?
For our students, we have them go through like a writing course and learning how to write as a journalist and learning how to tell between truth and error, right? How to do interviews, how to look up legal documents, how to decipher court cases, all of these things. We basically teach them how to be great researchers. I really believe everyone should take a journalism class. There's my plug. Take a journalism class because it teaches you how to really look into things and seek truth. And so we teach them all these principles, and then we teach them how to use a camera. We teach them how to use audio equipment. We teach them what to listen for, what to watch for, how to frame things, how lighting matters, how you light one presidential candidate needs to be the way you light another presidential candidate, so it shows equality and fairness. We teach them ethics. We teach all of these things, and I did that as a student, and I learned how to do it, and I became a one-woman show, which is I set up my cameras, I did the interviews, I did the photography, and I also did the reporting, and you teach them how to write and all of that. An accomplishment for our students is getting them published. We want them to be published professionally as a student. That's something that I'm trying to pilot right now with Utah State University, is working on publishing partnerships. And we're piloting a new program in connection with 200 other universities to get students in newsrooms as students doing professional work now. And so a portfolio is what accomplishment looks like, a portfolio of published work for our students specifically on TV. the biggest joy I had this last semester was watching my students accomplish that, similar to what I did as a student.
So you're teaching a class now, and you're taking students through the program. Were you 21 when you were going through this program?
I graduated at 23.
So when you were going through this program initially, are there things that you were taught that you now believe are either fundamentally wrong, or you're like, it's just not? I mean, we're not calling people out on this, but I'm curious, what are you intentionally changing about your students' education versus what you were taught in yours?
Great question, Dallin. I think for me, it's the culture that I'm trying to engender in my students. I was often told I was too soft or too kind, which is like the silliest criticism ever. To be a journalist, and that I wouldn't make it in this cutthroat world. And certainly journalism is cutthroat, but something that I really believe is that you can be kind and you can be respectful, and you can still get the hard answers by showing human decency to another person, and you can still do those hard investigations while still having a heart. And so something that I've hopefully introduced to my students is that concept of like, I want you to be you, because you are the product in media, right? And I want you to be as authentic as you can while still adhering to the journalistic principles that we follow. Editing video, principles of shooting video, audio, right? We always record it at -6 to -12 to make sure that we're not peaking our audio. Stuff like that stays the same.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think most of your students are going to pursue a career, either broadcasting or for a network, or do you think they're moving in the direction of going more, being more of an independent journalist?
I believe independent journalism is huge right now, and I think there's a lot of power in it. There are problems with it. As a journalist, I have to uphold the company philosophy. I'm beholden and accountable to an agency, whereas an independent journalist can say something and they're only accountable to themselves.
Yeah.
Right? I see a mix of both. Right now, we have a really good pipeline with our students down to the Salt Lake broadcast institutions, and we see a lot of our students start there. But we see them go be media professionals in so many different areas, PBS, even Amazon, doing
Interesting
corporate videos for them. So we see them go wherever they can and fit in where we don't have an independent journalist yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw one soon.
There's different points to that. Independent journalism is so important.
Yes.
But at the same time, people can go off the rails, get a following, and they are like bananas. They don't know what they're saying.
Yes.
And so I don't really know what I think about that either. I can see like it's so important, but it also can be so disastrous. You had shared the story with me recently where you said, I was writing stories. My first boss did not like my story. So I called my professor and I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
And your professor told you, Erin, news is for you, not for your boss.
Yeah.
He's encouraging you, follow your passion, follow your interests.
Yes.
You will bring the best energy to the thing that interests you most. But the downside of that is, Erin, like, I'll be just a little bit critical, and I'd love your thoughts on this. If you're a rookie, what better way to sharpen your sword than against the rough stone of somebody who's experienced and maybe even wrong, but they're experienced? And then number two would be like, you could just be flat out wrong and really set yourself out on the wrong foot.
I got 2 pieces of advice when I made that phone call.
Okay.
He said, you do this for you. You find your purpose for doing this. You don't do this for an agency, even though you work for an agency, but you do this for you. And you, at the end of the day, are the judge of your work, kind of a thing. Number 2, work at the standard of what you want your next job to be. So if you're not making your current boss happy, make your next boss happy. I reached out to reporters that I watched, and I said, will you please critique my work? And they did. And they ripped it to shreds and said, this is where you're doing good, and this is where you need to improve. I'm so grateful for them. That criticism helped me see things I couldn't see. And so I reached out to the people that I wanted to work with and the values and the places I wanted to go. And I said, I want you to give me feedback. Is that acceptable in the news organization? You're working for I don't know who you were with, but you're working at Fox. You go to someone at CNN and you're like, hey, can you critique my work? If your boss at Fox finds out, he's like, okay, well, you're fired. Or you know what I mean? Like, no, I don't think so, because it was independently me asking another journalist, I want to work like you do.
I see.
I want you to raise me up because I was a rookie and the learning curve, humongous, right? I'm 23 years old and I'm working with people I grew up watching the news with. That kind of learning curve can sink you. And I felt that pressure. I felt that pressure to rise above my current status and to be like the people that I watched and really cared for. And along that way, you take critique and then you learn things that you say, you know what, this is important to me, I'm going to try it. And you try new things. And sometimes it does fall flat. And other times it lands and it becomes a part of you and it becomes important to you. And so, yes, you reach out and get that critique. Reach out, always get that feedback, especially with media. You have to remake yourself every single day with every single story. And so it was a process. It was a climb. It was hard. And I just remember thinking, if I can make it 6 months, I can make it for the rest of my career. It's the same with if you ever do a sport. I always believe the first 2 weeks of any workout are the most important 2 weeks because that's where you're pushing through all the laziness and all the hardness of any habit you've built up, and you're breaking it down to create new habits. And if you can make it the first 2 weeks, you can make it a whole season. And that's how it was with journalism. So
that's a great mental framework to take on. I've heard that 6-month thing before. If you can do something for 6 months, you can do it for as long as you want. And the first 2 weeks are the ones that build the foundation of a habit. What other mental frameworks do you rely on when you're in different situations? So we can maybe break it up into a couple categories. When you're working on developing a story and it's long and it's grueling, there was a part of your career where you did everything. You would shoot it, you would edit it, you would be in front of the camera, you would have to present it, and then you're accountable for it after.
yes, absolutely.
So what's the framework that you rely on when you're developing a story versus when you're competing against somebody in your field? I'm curious to learn more about how you like to frame yourself in those situations.
Really great question. So oftentimes in the news, you will do stories where you have it exclusively and you get to own that story. There's also days where you show up and every single news station is at that story, right? That's a breaking news situation. Everyone and their dog is going to be there. You're going to be put against the top anchor at another station, and it's you, lowly you. That was actually my first day on the job, Dallin. My first official day as a news reporter. They just sent me down to, it was Utah County, for a story that everyone was there, and they had all the big time reporters there and me. And I just remember looking around and being like, oh my gosh, how can I convince someone to watch our channel when you could watch this from a veteran reporter who will be so much better than me on a different channel, right? Like I knew who I was, and I knew where I was on the totem pole. And the question I always ask myself when I arrive on any story or cover anything is, what can I uniquely bring to this space that someone else couldn't? And what is something that I can uniquely contribute to this story, not without changing the content, right? Yeah. Within the code of ethics that I follow, but and I play to those gifts, and I believe there is a different thing that you'll see from me versus a different reporter, and there will be a different tone to it and a different way to share it, and a different perspective. Another story. Elizabeth Smart, a couple years ago, started a new self-defense agency or self-defense program. And so she invited all of the media to come to sit with her. And Elizabeth Smart has been dealing with media since she was a young girl.
Oh, my goodness.
And so she knows what she's doing. She's an incredible woman. And I was the last reporter to sit down and interview with her. So that means she has had 4 other interviews other than me. And I just sat there and thought, she's going to be probably saying the same thing to everyone. So what is something I can ask her that's different? Can I share this moment with her in a way that's authentic to both of us? That's another thing that I try to do with my stories is I want the person across from me to feel as authentic and real as possible. And my hope is that they forget the microphone is on them. And my hope is they forget that there's a huge camera filming them. And every once in a while I get a glimpse of that happening where they say, I felt like myself, or I felt like I was talking to a friend. And those are things that I build into my framework of like, how can I talk to them in a way that brings down those superficial walls and they just have a moment where they just say, "Gosh, Erin, let me tell you this." And
What
that's
question
a good
did you
day.
ask her?
I don't know. There's something called a news brain, Dallin, which means after the day is over, sometimes I don't remember what I've done, and that is a real thing. You can ask me sometimes, "What did you cover last night?" And I will not remember it because I've reset the brain for today. So I'll have to go back through and look at that story.
Are there any memorable questions that you've asked that you feel like speak to the principle to what you just said? It is very unique to you and also really impactful at the same time.
Probably one of my favorites to ask is when we sit down and I just look at them and I just say, "How are you? How are you feeling right now? What's going on?" And just very conversationally, just almost drop all feelings of that professional environment and just be personal for a minute and just say, "Tell me how you are." There is one that really does stand out. And I was 22 years old. It's a really big year for me. I covered President Trump's inauguration, won my first journalism award for that, which was really exciting. And I covered it in D.C. That year, I also interviewed President Russell M. Nelson 4 months before he became prophet. I interviewed President Oaks, who is now current prophet for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I interviewed President Ballard all in 1 year, 22 years old. And I remember with President Nelson's interview, his was the first. And I remember sitting down, and they had asked for questions ahead of time, which we usually don't do in the media. We like to get the authentic, right?
It's a gotcha. No, I'm just kidding.
Some people do. Some people
yeah.
do gotcha journalism. I'm not one of those people, but it is that similar principle of we want to catch you in the moment.
You want a genuine reaction.
Yes.
And it helps with the conversation as well.
Good. Yes, exactly. And so with President Nelson, I sent a few topics. And I was my own photographer that day, so I came 2 hours ahead of time and set every light up, everything possible. I rearranged it, and then I just had time to sit. And I remember in that time sitting, I looked at that list of questions, and I kept feeling like I had one more question that was missing that wasn't there, but I didn't know what it was. And so I just kept thinking, and I think like 10 or so minutes before he came into the room, I had this thought of, think of the title that he bears. In the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the title that apostles bear is Special Witness of Jesus Christ. That is something that is in their charge and something that's important to them. And I felt like I should ask him what that meant to him. And so in this interview, 22-year-old Erin sits there and she asks him all these questions, and he was so eloquent and so wonderful and so brilliant. And at the end, you hear me go, "I have one last question for you. I mean, 2 last questions for you." And you see him chuckle for a minute. And it's because I had that unplanned last question of, "Tell me what it means to be a special witness of Jesus Christ." And that answer blew my mind. And it became something that I started asking every time I interviewed an apostle. And so I have a collection of their answers now. That is just such a sweet thing for me to have, but also something for me to share with people as I meet with other people. And then they ask me about these things. And I say, "Well, let me tell you what they taught me," right? And that was a question I didn't think ahead of time. It was something that came to me in the room.
So that specific answer to your question is on your social media.
Yeah.
People have got to check that out. It's so good. And I think you had a similar moment with recently deceased President Jeffrey R. Holland.
Yes.
Where you asked him a question, and I'm sure you remember it probably verbatim, but it was, you were talking about what can parents do when their children stray? Right. What counsel do you have? And his answer, he sat back in his chair and he folded his arms and he addressed you by name 2 or 3 times in the answer, and you could tell that was his way of. It was a great question asked at the right time, and he was in a good place to answer it. His defenses were completely down, and it had a really cool feeling to it. You've posted that one as well, which I enjoyed. I've rewatched that a couple of times over the years because I remember when you first posted it. What do you do then when you're in a conversation? Well, so I work in sales. Our guys knock doors.
Yeah.
Their job is
bless them.
Bless their souls. They are amazing at what they do. Their job is to knock on their door. I've never met you before. You probably don't like me because I'm knocking on your door and I want to sell you something. And in 30 seconds, I have to break down the barrier, build a relationship of trust. And over 60,000 times this year, 80,000 times this year. It ended in a transaction of at least $800 or higher.
Wow.
Like,
That's incredible.
it's pretty wild. One of the things that the questions that they'll ask is, how do you turn things around when it's going south? As a journalist, I want to ask you the same question. When you're interviewing somebody or when you're researching a story and things are going the wrong direction, the person is losing interest,
Right.
or you can't get a hold of evidence, when things are just starting to go downhill, how do you turn it around and come back?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. I have two perspectives on that. One of them is what determines something is going south, right? Especially when I sit down for an interview, do I come in with an agenda or am I coming to find out what the story is?
Well, let's just say that you can tell that like you've asked a question and now they've put up a wall,
Right.
or they're just not, you can tell they're just not interested.
Oh, yeah.
Like I've been in those situations. That sucks when you're like, gosh, dang it. Like they're not interested.
Right.
What am I supposed to do?
Right. That usually happens when we're covering like crime and the person that we're interviewing has to do it for their job. It's not something they want to do, right? Whereas other stories, if people don't want to talk, then I can't tell their story. And silence is a story of its own. And I let them know that, and I say, when you're ready, come talk to me. And we have to let them go. But the ones that have to talk to us for their job, sometimes it's a moment where you turn the camera off or you just step aside for a second and just say, hey, thanks for being here. Like, I know that this is not what you want to be doing, but I see you and I appreciate you. It usually helps people.
And then you resume the interview?
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, I've done that plenty of times where I've turned the camera off and just said, can we just talk for a minute? Like, I need you to know who I am. I need you to know that I'm not trying to sabotage your life by asking you these questions. I'm actually trying to figure out what this story is and how to best share it. I've done that many, many times where you just turn the camera off and you just have an authentic moment
Take
with
a
them.
step back.
Yeah. Plenty of times with people higher up, gubernatorial candidates, you name it. I've had to turn off the camera and just say, talk to me.
Do you do that when the stakes are high?
Yeah.
Like, not every interview would be a career ender if you really blew it up.
Right.
But there's probably some that are like, the reward for great work is more work.
Yeah.
And the punishment for poor work is less work.
There you go.
And it is
Yes.
a punishment.
Yeah.
And so if you have an interview with President Russell M. Nelson,
Yeah.
and you blow it, you ask something stupid, or you make a fool of yourself, the chances that you get to interview the prophet or a high-ranking church official instantly goes down. Your stock tanks.
Yeah.
Right? So how do you handle that moment of pressure?
Well, I'll tell you what, I look back at that interview and I think I did ask stupid questions. I would ask totally different questions if I sat with him 10 years later, right? We can always redo something and do it better. So yes, you prepare, but there was something that one of my managers told me that has stuck with me over the years. He said, if you're in the room and you got the interview, you deserve to be there. And so, yeah, you work hard. You don't want to look like an idiot. You don't want to hurt someone's trust in you. I really believe you can only blow it if you don't care. If you truly care about what you're doing, and if you care about the people you're interacting with, then blowing it, so to speak, is not really blowing it. It's more of a lesson learned. Because I've sat in those rooms with people, and I do my homework because I don't want to blow it, right? But there are many moments where I sit back and I go, gosh, I wish I would have done that differently or better.
Sure.
But how would I know that if I hadn't done it first?
Sure.
Right?
I feel the same way with these conversations. I look back at someone like, that was a dumb question.
Right.
Or they'll leave the door wide open for something.
Yes.
And I just like walked right past
Yes.
it. Like, oh, dang it. So here's another take on that, Erin. Have you ever interviewed somebody that you don't like or you completely disagree with?
All the time.
Larry King did an interview on the Tim Ferriss show. It was with Cal Fussman. And he had this really interesting thing. He said he was talking to Cal about interviewing adversarial people. And he said a lot of the times when you're sitting down with somebody, you want to ask them, why'd you do it? Or what made you want to do X, Y, or Z that was so bad? And he puts this question to Cal. It's an extreme question, but it really makes you think. He's like, what if you got an interview with Osama bin Laden? What would you ask him? And Cal was like, I'd want to know why he did it.
Yes.
Why did you fly the planes into the buildings? And Larry King said, look, you just got to remember, Adolf Hitler did not wake up every morning, comb his hair, and say, I am the worst, most rotten, evil man in the history of the world.
Right.
And he said, with bin Laden, if I ever had the chance to interview him, if I had ever had the chance, I would have started. You were born into a rich royal family of Saudi Arabia oil money, and you left it all to live in the hills.
Tell me why.
Tell me why.
Yeah.
He says, and then an hour into that conversation, then I can say, on that fateful day in September.
Yeah. Exactly.
What's your perspective on how do you handle your emotions? How do you stay calm when you're interviewing somebody who you believe is just rotten?
Yeah.
Or you just completely disagree with?
Yeah, great question, Dallin. I think my favorite thing about being a news reporter is it's never supposed to be about me. This whole conversation has been about me, and it's been horrendous for me because I'm used.
I've quite liked it.
Okay, good. I'm used to asking about other people, caring more about what they say than what I say, right? And so for me, and a lot of people have asked me this, they'll be like, well, how is you as a religious person with strong convictions, how can you go to these stories and cover them objectively? And I just turn to them and I say, well, when was the story ever about me? And that's what I think journalists have gone wrong these days, and where media has gone wrong is it's become about the people telling the story more than it has about the people we're telling the stories about, right? So I'll give you two examples. I covered extensively the Utah man that was accused of inciting the January 6th insurrection of the Capitol of the United States of America, and even went to his home while he was on parole and had that conversation of, tell me what's going on in your brain. I definitely have some personal feelings about that. I have some very strong personal feelings.
No, not Erin Cox.
I know. I'm not ashamed that I feel about my faith strongly or that I have political convictions or any of that. But I would be ashamed if I let that change how I tell my stories, because it's not about me. It's about who I'm telling the story of. It's about their voice and giving them a place to share their story. I'll have a place to share mine. It's not on the news, right? And so that was one example of, I just remember sitting across from him and I was like, well, never thought this would be my day. But here I am. I covered for a long time as a student journalist into my career the case of Torrey Green up here at Utah State. He was a linebacker accused of raping 6 women. Originally, it started out as 13. 6 women had enough evidence to go through court. I covered it from basically almost day one through the end of it. And I met with the victims, and I covered their story. I was the only reporter who exclusively was able to report their side of the story. And that was really empowering. And then a year later, Torrey Green appealed his case, and I covered his appeal. Now, I have heard all of the things that he is accused of doing and even convicted of doing. And I still wanted to share his appeal because I believe everyone has a story to share. And I believe that whether or not I have an opinion about it, that person deserves to have their story shared. And I'll tell you what, Dallin, I cover things politically, religiously, that I do not believe in. And those are some of my favorite stories, because I love giving people the chance to hear something different and to hear something new and to hear something that can educate them on their own belief system. It goes back to what we talked about with confusion and misinformation. What does it present? It presents a choice. What do I do as a journalist? I present choices. I give you information, and now I want you to choose what to do with it. I don't want to tell you that. I don't want to be a political commentator. I don't want to tell you what you should choose, but I want to give you every possible option so that you can choose for yourself what to believe, what to know, what information and to have, and what to do with that information. Those interviews sometimes are my favorite ones because they go against the grain, and it's an opportunity for me to say, this is not about me. This is about them and the story I'm sharing.
Do you model that after anybody? Like, had you seen somebody do that and you're like, yeah, that's right, I want to do that?
I've seen great teachers do that for me. That's teachers in my life, either religious or professors, who just gave me choices, didn't shove a political agenda down my throat. Right now, media is under fire, academia is under fire because people are sick of political agendas or personal agendas that are put in these professional spaces. And I have seen the impact that educators, politicians, church leaders have had on me when they don't do that. And they say, look, this is your choice, but I got to give you the information so that you can know how to make that choice. And they don't try and sway me one way or the other. That's powerful, and that's a powerful space to be in. Trusting me enough with information to make a choice for myself. And when you don't trust people, you tell them what to think. And you tell them how to believe, and you tell them how to choose. And you have to have a certain level of trust in humanity to say, no, I'm going to give you this information. Now go forth and live it, right?
If somebody's talking to you and you're giving them a fair shot, so to say.
Yeah.
And you believe they're totally spewing lies or nonsense, do you call them out on it, or do you just let them speak unobstructed?
I think you let them finish their sentence. And then you fact check people. I mean, that's part of my job as a journalist. We call journalists the fourth branch of government because they keep our politicians accountable. And I've had a couple politicians who I'm good friends with call me and say, I hated this piece that your coworker did. Can you go talk to them and tell them da-da-da-da? And I just turned on them like, if you hate it, then run a social media campaign talking about what you believe is right. They hate the pushback. And for me, I'm like, no, the pushback is what makes us stronger. It's lack of conflict that means we've all settled and we're not trying to achieve something stronger. Spent a lot of time studying China, mostly because I lived there. That was my master's degree, was international relations with China. And I read this bio. This woman, her father was Chairman Mao's Soviet Union translator. Okay, so he's a Chinese person translating into Russian. Okay, so he's in the room where it happens with Gorbachev, you name it, like these big figures. And she said at the end of this book, after talking about all these experiences, she said, I learned why the United States is a democracy versus China. And it's because they have the ability to protest. We don't. I think that's such a powerful idea, is that conflict allows truth to come forth. And so if a politician doesn't like the way you're reporting something, well, there's probably truth on both sides happening there. I'm okay with that conflict. Because that, again, compels you to find what the truth is. Whereas if there's no conflict, then we're either too lazy to do something or it's propaganda, right? So,
what are some of the underrated benefits of being a reporter? Maybe they're not shared publicly, but for you, they've been like, oh, this has been like a huge difference maker for me.
There's this glamour that people think of being on TV. And journalists, we all look at each other and we know the real side of it. It's a lot of hard work. And you see a lot of crummy things, a lot of hard things. What we show on TV is the filtered version.
Sure.
Of a lot of heinous crimes that we cover. But I would say one of the benefits, and the one that I hold true to, is I love my community. And I love being with my community. I love talking with them. I love hearing their stories. And that's joyful for me. I mean, there's been times in my career where I cover a story and the next day I go back and take my reporter hat off and I just go and get my hands dirty and serve and do stuff with the community because I enjoy that aspect of it. That's the biggest silver lining for me, is meeting the people.
You talked about the amount of work that it takes to do all this, and I don't know if you're still. I know you're still not doing it at this pace because
Right.
you're teaching. You're reporting part-time, but when you were working, finding your own stories, researching, writing, producing, interviewing, presenting, rinse, wash, and repeat.
Right.
It kind of ruled your life.
Yes.
And you had mentioned to me before that it was like, I've been on my knees and I've asked God, is this preventing me from other opportunities in my life because of how much I am sacrificing for this?
Yes.
Not only other opportunities, but relationships.
Yes.
And just, you weren't married at the time.
Yes.
Can you speak to that and what you've learned through that experience? Because you're still in it. You're doing something different, but you're still highly engaged.
Right.
and life has kind of taken some really exciting turns for you.
Yes, there's different seasons in life. I'm so grateful for the season I had where journalism could be my love for a long time. And that was really, really rewarding. And there are some skills that I received and some attributes and characteristics I developed through that I would have gotten nowhere else. So it played a role in my life and who I've become. Now, this is fun because I am in a totally different season of life. I've just recently gotten married 6 months ago. I'm now a full-time professor, and I dedicate my time to helping others achieve. I'm also dedicating my time to building a home, right, with someone who has a completely different career than me and a different way of thinking about things, and it's an adjustment. I'll say that, and I miss the grind. I think once a news reporter, you'll always miss the daily grind of it. But what a wonderful thing to dedicate yourself wholly to a career and whatever you choose, and to give that time specifically to that. We bounced around this word earlier, consecrated. Consecrated means it's been set up for a special purpose. For me, that time was consecrated. It was a special purpose. And yes, there were stories I told that only I could tell. But the real purpose was God was creating someone in me. He created that person through that time. And now he needs me to be different, to hone in some new skills. And that's thrilling. That's exciting. Faith is for the future. I believe that with all my heart. And what a great thing it is to have seasons of life where you can give so wholly of yourself to one thing. But ultimately, I think those priorities sometimes change. And that's a good thing.
Do you still have big aspirations in your career to report for BBC China?
Yes.
Or, something else to that degree?
Yes. There's a lot of things that are unfulfilled for me that I desire to do. We'll see if I ever do them. I'm excited at where my media journey goes next. Excited to see what God gives me and opens doors for me and says, maybe think about this, but I don't know what that looks like. There's a lot of unfulfilled. Yeah, I'd love to do BBC China. I don't know if that one will ever happen, to be honest. There's people I'd love to interview. I have an interview list of people, and there's some that I will never, like the Candy Bomber. He was someone I always wanted to interview, and
Yeah.
I lost that opportunity, right? And so, but he was someone that I really looked up to and just always wanted to interview.
Who else is on your interview list?
I always wanted to interview President Nelson again. I always wanted a second chance at that one, just because it would have been so fun. I saw so much change in his life over a decade. That would have just been the cherry on top. I covered and interviewed those around him for his obituary, but I did always want a second interview with him. That would have been fun. Other people on my list. This is kind of a funny one. I've always wanted to interview Carrie Underwood.
Nice.
Because I love her music, but also because I love her faith. I've always wanted to do that. I've always wanted to do something for the Christian Network. I think that would be really cool. I always used to joke that I wanted to be the next reporter sitting in Air Force One and being a White House correspondent. But those things, these things that you want, these goals, it's similar for me. It's like the Olympics for someone else, right? The amount of work it takes to get there, we forget about that. And I don't know if this is the season of life to put that in. Maybe let's do this again in 20 years and see where we're at.
So we've talked about a few key areas of tension. There's ambition versus obedience.
Yeah.
Work intensity versus the personal life balance, and faith versus intellectual independence. If we were to take those one at a time, maybe let's start with ambition versus obedience. Obedience, I put that as kind of having like religious or spiritual overtones, right? Like a calling.
Yeah.
Can you speak to how would you counsel somebody to approach tension on those two areas?
Tension comes when my ambition is not in line with what I believe God wants me to do. I think the Lord loves ambition. A lot of people say, if you want to see God laugh, make plans. And I disagree with that wholeheartedly, because I have seen in my life, I make a plan and I present it to God, and I've watched him say, well, let's tweak it here and let's move this here and see what you think of this, Erin. And it's never been him laughing at me, which has been really joyful. a lot of people will say that we know that God loves us. And we do know that. But I think one of the most joyous things in my life is to learn that he also likes me. He likes who I am. He likes to spend time with me. He likes my personality. He likes my dreams. And so ambition for me has never been a conflict unless it has been to serve myself instead of him. What gives me momentum in my life is my faith in Jesus Christ and my relationship that I put into that. Now, that's not true for everyone. They have different things that motivate them and give them momentum, but that is the pillar of my life. And when we talk about the word obedience, for me, obedience means that I love God. And it's not this slave-master relationship. It's a friend to friend.
Yeah.
I love spending time with my friend. And I love doing the things that bring me closer to my friend. So this is the framework that I work under. Is there are a lot of things that compete for our time, right? There's family, there's job, there's school sometimes, there's community engagement, community service. There's a lot of, there's religious obligations. There's a lot of things that draw away from our time. But for me, I have put all of those things under one envelope. And that envelope for me is loving God. So when I go to my work, I do the best I can because that's how I love God. When I go to serve my community or go to my church or do whatever it is, I put it under that same umbrella or envelope of loving God so that it's not me doing 6 gazillion different things and it turns into me doing one thing with one purpose and one power towards it. And that's how I live my life. It helps me organize and not feel like I'm doing 6 gazillion things all at once, and rather it helps everything go towards the purpose that I have set for my life.
The last tension to manage is faith versus intellectual independence. Being you spoke to this a little bit already. Like, I think everybody has a story to tell, regardless of whether I agree with him or not. Principally based, though, how do you manage that tension between the things that you know to be true versus having the freedom to kind of stretch or challenge or speak to your beliefs and the beliefs of others, whatever they might be?
I love challenging the intellect. That is invigorating for me. That's exciting. And I don't see it as a conflict with my faith for many reasons. I'm going to stem back. I've talked a lot about it. It's probably one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. But again, that interview with President Russell M. Nelson, I turned to him and I said, "Hey, President Nelson, there's a lot of people in their mid-20s that decide they don't want to be faithful to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints anymore. They're saying, I'm done with that. I've lived it my whole life. I'm done with it." And they decide to step away for a time. And I asked him, I said that to him. And then I said, would you encourage people to have a faith crisis, or what would you say? And he said, "Oh, Erin, a faith crisis just means you don't know something yet." I thought that was such a great perspective. A lot of the times we in our lives, we have institutional crises where the institution, whether it's a government, academia, media, or a church, no longer feels like it aligns with who we are. And we have this institutional crisis, or we have a faith crisis where we say, I don't know if what I've believed all this time aligns with who I am. And we call it a crisis because we feel fear surrounding the unknown. And what President Nelson shared with me had resonated with me. He said, I wouldn't discourage a faith crisis. In fact, everyone has to come to know for themselves that the faith of their fathers is correct or not correct. And if it's not correct, you can build on it. And that is something that I believe in my life with intellect and faith. I love science and I love religion, and I don't believe they conflict with each other because they both are aimed at seeking greater light and seeking truth, and it's invigorating and it's exciting. And if there's something that I learn that I'm like, that's something I didn't know, and maybe it reveals something that might feel scary, I ask myself, why is there fear there? And how do we eliminate fear? We eliminate darkness through greater light. And that means if I'm feeling fear or scared about something, that means I need to look into it more and learn more about it, because the more I know, the less I fear.
Have you ran into that in your job?
Yes.
Maybe on a specific story?
I remember there's a couple of investigations I've done where we just didn't have all of the knowledge, and you could just taste it. It's a little bit like detective work. A little bit of, okay, where do we go next? There were 2 other investigations where it was day by day, line upon line, that we learned information. 2 murder investigations that I covered back to back in 2019. The murder of Mackenzie Lewick, a University of Utah student. She was 23 at the time. I was 24 at the time. So that one really resonated with me. And then a couple weeks later, there was one in Logan, Utah, the 5-year-old Elizabeth Shelley, who was raped and then left for dead from her uncle. And that was really hard. Both of those stories have stayed with me for a long time. It took a lot of uncovering, and there was conflict of, we don't know, we can't confirm this. There's someone that always has the truth, and we have to work to find who that person is.
It's an interesting skill set to convince somebody to share something with you, that to help them believe that it is in their best interest to do so. I don't know how you do it. It's got to be a big relationship-based thing. Maybe reputation plays a part when you have a great reputation, but there's just in the moment kind of things. They've got to feel safe, and they've got to feel heard.
Yes.
They've got to feel known, and then they've got to feel like this isn't going to ruin their life.
Yes.
Sharing it with you.
Yes.
When you're reporting and you're digging up a story on something really ugly and something very painful and really hard to learn more about, how do you teach your students to conduct themselves or prepare themselves and not let dark stories just drag them down with it?
I think that's a skill that everyone needs, not just journalists these days, because media has made all of these heinous crimes and the information behind them so accessible, right? You think of the Chad and Lori Daybell case with the 2 children, Tylee and JJ.
It's irresistible. You have to click on the article.
Yes.
And you're not happier after having read it.
No.
But there's something about it that you're like, oh my gosh, I have to learn more about that.
Exactly.
If it bleeds, it leads, kind of a thing.
Yeah. If it bleeds, it has impact.
Yeah.
If it leads, it has impact. If it bleeds, it has impact. So yeah, exactly. There's those stories that it's like, I don't want to read this, but I end up reading the whole thing, right? And you're right. You feel awful afterwards. I get paid to write those headlines. I get paid to write those articles. And for the most part, what I've learned is, even after all of this, I still believe people are good. Now, crime rates are increasing. I've looked at the numbers every year, the stats that are published by the state of Utah. They do studies. I look at them, and crime rates are increasing. And so you can have that perspective of people are bad, but also something that I know for myself is that a lot of the things that we cover in the news are the wow stories. The holy cow, you have to read this. You have to know this. If you were to do a news story on my life, you'd probably be pretty bored, right? Like if you had to do a news story on just the day-to-day life,
sure,
you wouldn't watch TV, you wouldn't read articles. And so there is an aspect of the news that it brings you the fantastic and the horrendous all at once. And you have to know that. Again, how do you teach that to your students? I just tell them from my perspective, and I take my hat off basically and say, this is my personal opinion, so here you go. I don't like to share that in class, but I'm going to share this with you. I believe most people are good. And when I step outside of my social media and have one-on-one conversations, I leave feeling better about the world. It's media literacy skills, it's social media skills, it's learning what truth is. And for me, most people are good. Most politicians are great. I talk with politicians on all sides of the aisle. I enjoy talking with them. I enjoy hearing how they think about life, and I enjoy hearing the policies they thought of. Do I agree with all of them? No. And do some politicians do really shady things? Certainly.
No.
But I believe most people are good. I believe we have to believe that, because I don't want to spend the rest of my life cowering under the pillow, stuck to my phone, wondering what bad thing is going to happen next. I'd rather be out with my community, go to church, go to community events, and see the good in the world.
You mentioned the importance of finding truth a lot. How do you teach someone to find truth if they don't have the religious or spiritual fortitude or background, and it's more logic-based or reason? How do you teach them to identify truth?
There are just things that are simply true and not true. Either through empirical evidence, which is evidence that you can see, evidence that is said, evidence that is written. There is false information out there, but a lot of the news is seeing and believing. Now, spiritual truth, that is different. That is a different pursuit, because what I see is in my heart. What I experience is not necessarily empirical. It's seeing as a new perspective more than seeing as like a personage. But those who are not religious, how do you seek truth? And you have to do your due diligence. And for me, it's all about the source. It's all about who do you turn to for that information? Am I getting it from AI? Okay, if I got it from AI, does AI have a link to that source? Okay, is that source BuzzFeed? Is that source some TikToker? Or is that source the actual person? And you'll see this all the time on social media. You'll see these articles that say, I can't believe this person said this on The View, or something like that. And it's totally fake. It's totally fake. And how do you know? Just go to that person's page. Go to the horse's mouth. That's an old phrase.
Yep.
That still rings true.
Yeah. Glenn Beck told me once about his, you're probably familiar with his story as well, and his search for truth. And he had reached a point in his life where it was like, I find truth, or I don't want to be here anymore.
Yeah.
He had just reached a breaking point, and he's in his early 30s, late 20s, early 30s. And he said he went to the bookstore, and he said, I just wanted to read everything I could. And if I could find one guy from this part of the world and this guy 300 years before him on a different part of the world talk about the same thing, he says, I would find that intersection, and he says, I would identify that as truth.
Yes.
I have one point of something that I think is true. And he would build a network of people that completely disagreed each other. Good figures from history, bad figures from history, religious, atheist, zealots, whatever. Anything he could get his hands on, he says, and I would stack these little points of truth on top of each other. And he says, and that's where I had assembled my initial web of what I believed is true.
Yeah.
And it gave him the foundation to stand on. Shortly thereafter, he got into religion, and is now a faithful, a faithful religious man.
Yeah.
And but I thought that was interesting. That's where he started. He had nowhere to turn except for external factors, and he had a gut sense, but he didn't believe that he really knew it, because it had led him astray in his life. His gut and his desires and his feelings had betrayed him in a sense.
Yes.
He'd put so much into it without basing it off of anything lasting or enduring or absolute.
Yes.
That has got to be the struggle, and that's got to be like the break room conversation at a news station. You would know, like, news agencies are not handcuffed to the truth, and ratings impact them, and money and sponsorships and deals and access and coverage. The incentives are so misaligned in some areas where you would think people are tied to the truth, and they're virtuous warriors for the people. It's not always the case, and it's put news outlets in such criticism, especially in recent years with the reporting on COVID, other world events. Sometimes it's hard to know, Erin, who do you even listen to?
Right.
Because they seem credible, they seem researched. They both seem distasteful in their own unique way in certain areas, and it's like the incentives are not all there. They're not paid by truth; they're paid by views. And so, how do you know? How are you supposed to find out? So, as a journalist in the middle of that,
right,
have you had to draw a line in the sand for yourself on certain things that you're like, okay, I am never going to cross that line, and then in doing that, has that closed doors for you in your career?
There's something called a conflict of interest. If there's something that's within a conflict of your personal interest, you can speak that up to your boss and say, I am not the best person to be covering this story. And I have done that. I have said that to my boss. Hey, I'm not the best person to cover this story because I have a conflict of interest. Please give that to someone else. Something that's wonderful about being a homegrown Utah reporter and reporting on my community is that I get to cover stuff that my neighbors do. That's also the worst part of this job. And there have been stories, plenty of them, of friends from high school or neighbors in my community that I hear news and I say, I can't cover that because I know that person and I cannot be objective here. And once that objective threshold is crossed, that is my boundary. That is where I say I can no longer cover this. We talk about how news, they are owned by advertisers and sponsors. That is true. That's absolutely true. But for the most part, my experience in local news has seen that if there's a story to be told, we will tell it. There have been some stories that we have not told because of sponsorships. And that's wrong. That is wrong. But that's the exception for the rule, in my experience.
Sure.
And so I can no longer be objective about how I report on this. That's where I say, please take me out of this. And all of my bosses have always respected that.
I have 2 more questions for you, Erin. If you could go back and talk to 23-year-old Erin, having just graduated her program, in between the time that you were graduated and hired, what counsel would you share with her right now with what you know?
I would just share, keep dreaming. It's always easy to look back at our past and say it's going to work out. There were a lot of things that it wasn't going to work out on, and that's okay. Keep dreaming. Keep going. Keep moving forward. Do not lose momentum because what you think should be happening isn't happening. Momentum doesn't come because circumstances. Momentum comes because you keep trying and you keep pushing forward despite whatever happens. And so that's what I would say to 23-year-old Erin is keep dreaming and keep shooting for the stars. Because wouldn't we all rather shoot for the stars and drag through the trees than shoot for the trees and drag through the mud? That's a Coach Claude from my cross-country days quote, but I believe that. Keep dreaming and don't lose. Why would you lose faith and lose dreams? Isn't that what keeps us going anyways? That's momentum enough for me. And so, and sure, dreams change. Faith changes. That's a great opportunity to become someone new.
I've heard it said that we overestimate what we do in a year's time, but we underestimate what we can do in 5 or 10 years' time. My final question, Erin, is what's the kindest thing anyone's ever done for you?
I think the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me is believed in me. I've been blessed in so many different ways, and people have done kind acts for me. But I think the kindest thing anyone has ever done is believed in who I am and believed in me enough to trust me. Now that I can think of a handful of people, my husband, my sweet parents, who believed in me through all the hard years of news that no one knows about, right? We only show on social media the successes. But the people who believed in me when I wasn't necessarily quote unquote worth believing in, those are the people that I hold dear to me in my heart, because that was kindness, and they saw truth before it was revealed. They saw that I could do things and do and become things before I actually did. And that to me is true kindness. And that's something that I try to do for my students and for the people I meet is believe in them. Believe that they can do great things. I think that's something that a lot of students struggle with today is they don't believe they can do hard things, and I fully believe in their capabilities. So I think the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me is believed in me and given me a chance.
Do you have a specific moment that came to mind?
What jump-started my career was my professor. He freelanced for Channel 13. They asked him for New Year's Eve of 2017. And he said, I could come down, but I'd really like you to take a look at my student. He believed in my abilities, so he pitched me. He wasn't my boss yet, but he would become my boss. Decided to believe in me and gave me a chance, and I reported for the first time on TV New Year's Eve of 2017, and I was on Fox News that night, national news. I was on local news, national news, and on TV for the first time ever. So it was a professor who believed in me, and then it was a future boss who believed in me and gave me a chance and hired me at 23. He let me do stories, and he sometimes pulled me aside and said, I don't know if you can do this. And I said, of course I can do this. It's parents believing in me when I tell them, hey, I'm going to do this. And they're like, whoa, Erin, Are you sure? And I'm like, yes. And they support me and believe in me. My husband, great man. And he believes in me and my ability to do things. And he says, go do it. And so those are a few examples. They are the people that are closest to me because they gave me a chance. They believed in, again, something they couldn't see. That gets a bad rap these days. Faith in things that we cannot see, like religion or God, gets a bad rap. But we do it all the time. We believe in people even though we don't see the outcome all the way yet. That's what love is, right? That's what relationships are. That's what hiring a new person is. It's the same thing. It's believing without seeing and trusting in the potential of someone. And that's just so cool. I've been so blessed by the people who have done that for me.
If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the podcast on Instagram at the handle Momentum Theory Pod, where I'll be announcing new episodes weekly, as well as sharing my top takeaways from every conversation. As always, I invite you to please share this episode with anyone you think could benefit from the conversation. So long for now, and thank you for tuning in.